Welcome to Daylight. Today is 19th of April, 2026. In a developing story that has captured global attention, an extensive investigation is underway following allegations of significant irregularities within Iran's political and economic systems. As the Iranian government faces mounting pressure both domestically and internationally, the investigation seeks to uncover the truth behind reports of corruption, mismanagement, and potential violations of international law. The stakes are high, with implications that could extend beyond Iran's borders. The findings could influence regional stability and further strain Iran's relationships with key global players. As protests continue to escalate within the country, the world watches closely to see how the Iranian authorities will respond to these serious allegations amid calls for greater accountability and transparency. This investigation not only underscores the challenges Iran faces internally, but also raises critical questions about governance and human rights in the region. Iranian officials have affirmed their resolve in the face of ongoing tensions with the United States, declaring that they will stand to the end against U.S. pressure. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, the Speaker of the Iranian parliament and top negotiator, emphasized during a televised address that while progress has been made in negotiations, significant gaps remain, particularly concerning fundamental issues. Ghalibaf's remarks followed the first round of U.S.-Iran talks in Islamabad, which occurred last weekend. In the wake of these talks, U.S. President Donald Trump announced a blockade of Iranian ports and shipping through the strategically critical Strait of Hormuz, a vital artery for global oil trade. Notably, the strait handles approximately 25% of the world's crude oil traffic. On Friday, Iran momentarily opened the waterway to all commercial vessels, framing this action as part of ceasefire arrangements associated with the Israel-Lebanon truce and efforts to de-escalate regional tensions. However, the strait was closed again shortly after Trump's announcement, maintaining the U.S. blockade until a comprehensive peace agreement is reached between the parties involved. Ghalibaf remarked, "We are still far from a final agreement," and stressed the need for the U.S. to earn the trust of the Iranian people amidst what he described as a climate of deep distrust. Looking beyond diplomacy, Ghalibaf warned of U.S. efforts perceived as attempts to instigate unrest within Iran, stating that initiatives aimed at regime change and the Venezuelization of Iran in order to undermine its oil economy have similarly failed. He conveyed a message of national resilience, noting, "It is clear that the enemy was defeated, but this is different from saying that we destroyed its army." In a related development, Trump has characterized the dialogue with Iran as involving very good conversations, while insisting that he will not permit the country to blackmail the United States regarding issues concerning the Strait of Hormuz. Simultaneously, counter-terrorism authorities in the UK have initiated investigations into potential Iranian links to a series of recent arson attacks in London, including an attempted firebombing of a synagogue in northwest London. Metropolitan Police Deputy Commissioner Matt Jukes reported that Britain's Jewish community is facing a concerted campaign with specific mention of incidents linked to the Ashab al-Yamin group, which is publicly associated with Iran. These events coincide with reports of increased anti-Semitic activity in London, including recent attacks on Jewish charities and establishments. Vicky Evans, the Deputy Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, noted that the individuals carrying out these attacks often lack ideological allegiance and are motivated by financial gain, recruiting, violence as a service. The police are treating these incidents as hate crimes, with a notable emphasis on the need to prosecute those involved under the National Security Act. Furthermore, London Mayor Sadiq Khan condemned these attacks and affirmed that there is no place for anti-Semitism in the city. In parallel with these domestic issues, the Iranian government has publicly ridiculed calls from the EU to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and comply with international law. Following an incident where Iranian gunboats fired upon vessels attempting passage through the vital shipping lane, Iran's decision to briefly open the strait was reversed in response to the escalating U.S. naval blockade jeopardizing its oil exports. Amidst this backdrop, reports also surfaced regarding internal Iranian negotiations, suggesting that there is currently no decision by Iran to send a negotiating delegation to Pakistan, with the Tasnim news agency citing ongoing conditions related to the naval blockade as a hindrance. In the U.S., political discourse is charged with claims from figures such as former Vice President Kamala Harris, who suggested that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu exerted influence over President Trump to engage in military actions against Iran, a conflict Harris argued is unpopular among the American public. She criticized Trump's administration as harmful to U.S. alliances and international norms, labeling it as corrupt, callous, and incompetent. These developments, highlighting tensions in Iranian-U.S. relations, domestic violence in the UK attributed to Iranian proxies, and the geopolitical stakes surrounding the Strait of Hormuz, combined to create a complex landscape of international diplomacy and security threats. Israel's ambassador to the United Nations has publicly criticized France, China, and Pakistan, alleging that they are supporting Iran through shipping agreements that facilitate safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. This accusation follows reports indicating that commercial vessels from these nations traverse the strait amid an ongoing blockade, some with Iranian authorization. Ambassador Danny Danon raised pointed questions during a UN General Assembly session, asking the French ambassador directly about financial compensation to Iran for maritime safety, to which he claims there was no satisfactory response. Alongside his remarks about France, he noted the absence of answers from the ambassadors of China and Pakistan. The Strait of Hormuz, a strategic route accounting for approximately 20% of global oil and liquefied gas transit, has faced significant disruptions since Iran enforced a blockade following the commencement of a U.S.-Israeli bombing campaign on February 28. Recently, Iran temporarily opened the strait to all commercial vessels, declaring it part of ceasefire arrangements related to a truce between Israel and Lebanon, only to close it again the following day. This back and forth has occurred amid the backdrop of President Donald Trump reiterating the continuation of the U.S. blockade against Iranian ports until a peace agreement materializes, following the collapse of bilateral discussions in Pakistan. In the context of maritime movements, the Financial Times reported in April that a container ship linked to a French company navigated through the strait along with other vessels. Notably, earlier this year, Iran announced that ships from several nations, including India, China, and Pakistan, would be authorized to pass through this vital maritime choke point, effectively highlighting China's role as a major buyer of Iranian oil. Further complicating the geopolitical landscape, the UK's Metropolitan Police have initiated an investigation into potential ties between Iran and recent arson attacks targeting Jewish sites in North London. Vicky Evans, Deputy Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, stated that many of these attacks have been claimed by a group known as Harakat Ashab al-Yamin al-Islamiyah, which has purported links to Iran. The recent arson at the Kenton United Synagogue caused minor damage, following a series of incidents that Evans noted were part of a troubling trend, raising concerns about the escalation of anti-Semitic violence in the UK. The chief rabbi of the UK, Ephraim Mirvis, condemned the recent attacks, emphasizing the urgent need for awareness regarding the risks posed to the Jewish community. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer expressed his outrage over these acts of violence, affirming that they will not be tolerated and reinforcing the government's commitment to justice for those responsible. In broader discussions regarding the geopolitical moment, political scientist Mohsen Milani has pointed out that Iran's relations with the U.S. hinge on its recognition of Israel as a legitimate entity in the region. The ongoing uranium enrichment issue remains a pivotal obstacle in U.S.-Iran negotiations, with Milani warning that unresolved tensions could lead to renewed conflict. Moreover, reports detailing Israeli military actions highlight a troubling pattern of strikes on healthcare facilities across Iran, Lebanon, and Gaza. Recent footage provided by the Iranian Red Crescent shows an Israeli strike hitting a hospital, reinforcing allegations of targeting civilian infrastructure amid regional hostilities. This development underscores the ongoing violence associated with the protracted Israeli-Iranian conflict, which continues to have far-reaching consequences beyond their immediate borders. A high-level American delegation is set to return to Pakistan for a second round of discussions focused on Iran, as U.S. President Donald Trump issues renewed threats aimed at the Islamic Republic. Trump has notably declared his intent to destroy all of Iran's power plants and bridges if a negotiated deal is not reached, characterizing this as a necessary response to Iran's military actions in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has not confirmed its participation in the talks, reportedly awaiting U.S. concessions, including the lifting of economic sanctions and unfreezing of Iranian assets, before engaging further. In a more aggressive tone, Trump described Iran's current leadership as crazy bastards and insisted that the United States would not tolerate any further disruptions from the country. His threats have prompted criticism from analysts in the U.S., who argue that a strategy based solely on intimidation is unlikely to bear fruit. Despite these threats, Iranian officials have indicated that they will not negotiate under duress, particularly with the backdrop of limited agreement from the U.S. regarding their security concerns and economic interests. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian has publicly rebuked the U.S., stating that Washington is the one who designs targeted assassinations while branding Iranians as terrorists, calling the silence of human rights advocates and international organizations into question. This context of heightened rhetoric indicates a volatile atmosphere surrounding the negotiations, which are further complicated by domestic pressures facing Trump regarding rising fuel prices and the backlash against his foreign policy approach. Amidst these geopolitical tensions, reports surfaced of 5 Iranian tankers loading oil at Karg Island and Bandar Mashar, despite the ongoing U.S. blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. The vessels are intended to serve as storage to protect Iran's oil infrastructure amid the blockade, which has led to increased maritime tensions in the area. The U.S. naval operations have involved 21 ships that reportedly complied with U.S. warnings and returned to Iranian ports, illustrating the enforcement of the blockade. In a marked contradiction, the U.S. Central Command announced that the Strait of Hormuz is fully operational for vessels. However, Iranian military officials declared that free passage is contingent on the lifting of the blockade. These conflicting statements reflect the deepening complexities in the region, where Iran has once again suspended passage through the strait, further asserting its control over a vital trade route through which approximately 20% of global oil transits. Iranian officials communicated that the U.S. has led a campaign of banditry and piracy while accusing the Trump administration of breaking trust by not fulfilling its promises. Trump, however, has been dismissive of Iranian moves, deeming them cute, while asserting the blockade would remain until a satisfactory deal is struck. As tensions escalate, communications from both sides indicate a precarious stalemate. Iran's deputy foreign minister emphasized that no enriched uranium would be surrendered, a point of contention that has stalled progress in negotiations. Meanwhile, Trump indicated he might be prepared to renew military action if an agreement isn't finalized by a looming deadline. Both the U.S. and Iranian governments continue to exchange hostile rhetoric as military posturing intensifies in the region. Reports of incidents in the Strait of Hormuz, where commercial vessels have faced assaults, heighten concerns over maritime safety amid ongoing hostilities. The situation remains fluid, with potential implications for global energy markets and regional stability hanging in the balance. Operations Epic Fury and Roaring Lion have been cited as strategically successful military campaigns aimed at halting Iran's progression towards nuclear weapons capability and degrading its ballistic missile program. The article from the Jerusalem Post outlines a series of military actions that involved over 15,000 airstrikes, significantly damaging Iran's military assets including air defenses, navy, missile launchers, and key infrastructure tied to its nuclear program. Before these operations commenced, Iran was reported to possess nearly 440 kilograms of enriched uranium, sufficient for up to 9 nuclear bombs, alongside producing over 100 ballistic missiles per month. Israeli and U.S. forces' campaign was described as a decisive military success, depriving Iran of substantial military and economic resources, while severely affecting its relations with several Arab Gulf states. The article notes this effort contributed to Iran's deepening economic crisis, as dual-use infrastructure critical to its economy was targeted, including petrochemical and steel production facilities that account for a significant portion of the country's GDP. In contrast, a report from the Tehran Times focused on domestic U.S. political implications of the military operations, particularly the impeachment articles filed against Secretary of War Pete Hegseth by Representative Yasemin Ansari. These articles accuse Hegseth of war crimes related to alleged incidents such as the Manab school massacre, in which American missile strikes reportedly killed 168 children and teachers. The push for impeachment encapsulates concerns regarding U.S. military actions in Iran and emphasizes the death toll of civilians amidst the broader military campaign. Controversy surrounding U.S.-Iran relations is further emphasized by recent developments involving the Strait of Hormuz. Reports indicate that Iranian forces have reimposed strict controls over this pivotal waterway, demanding the lifting of U.S. blockades before allowing navigation to resume. U.S. President Donald Trump characterized this demand as blackmail. Meanwhile, Iranian military officials have asserted that the strait will remain under strict management until the blockade is lifted, igniting further tensions. Contradictory statements emerged from Iranian officials regarding the status of the strait. While Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi claimed that it was open for commercial transit in line with a ceasefire, members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, voiced opposition, signaling a split within the Iranian regime. This discord has raised questions about the clarity of Iran's stance and the future of diplomatic negotiations. In a more provocative move, the U.S. military has reportedly prepared to board and potentially seize Iran-linked oil tankers in international waters within the coming days, an operation which could escalate tensions further. Combined with internal Iranian conflicts and regional military engagements, the situation remains volatile, with implications for global oil supplies and maritime security. Recent statements from U.S. officials indicate ongoing military readiness and pressure, with hopes for achieving significant geopolitical outcomes in the Middle East while addressing the dual threats of Iranian military advancement and the regional consequences of these conflicts. The contrast between military success narratives and accusations of war crimes illustrates the complexity of perceptions and realities in this ongoing confrontation. Spain's position under Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez has emerged as a notable deviation from the traditional alignments of Western nations amid the ongoing U.S.-Israel military operations against Iran. Analysts describe this conflict as one of the most complex geopolitical crises of the past decade, significantly reshaping regional security dynamics and straining intra-Western relationships. Spain has openly criticized these military actions, labeling them as illegal and against international law, and has refused to participate in military operations or allow the United States to utilize its bases in Rota and Morón for these purposes. This refusal signifies a profound shift in Spain's foreign policy towards a more assertive stance advocating for international norms and multilateralism. Sánchez articulated his government's position with the slogan, "No a la guerra," no to war, which reflects a broader vision denouncing violence against civilians and emphasizing the need for lawful and moral approaches to conflict resolution. Sánchez highlighted the dangers of repeating past mistakes, such as those seen in the Iraq War, which he warns could destabilize the global order. The Spanish government's commitment to holding a critical stance against both Washington and Tel Aviv has led to escalated diplomatic tensions. Notably, Sánchez accused the Israeli government of violating international law, particularly during a press conference in Beijing, asserting that international law is today fundamentally being violated by one country, which is the government of Israel. The diplomatic fallout from Spain's position was further underscored when then-President Trump threatened Spain with potential trade sanctions due to its non-compliance with U.S. military objectives. Such threats showcase the diplomatic friction developing between traditional allies. Meanwhile, Spain's route has gained domestic traction, resonating with a public historically resistant to military involvement due to the legacy of the Iraq War. In a related context, the United States, aiming to curb Iran's influence regionally, facilitated discussions between Israel and Lebanon, aiming to disarm Hezbollah. While these talks did not result in a ceasefire, both sides expressed intentions to engage in further negotiations, marking a significant step in addressing shared concerns. The Israeli ambassador underscored the mutual goal of countering Hezbollah's power, indicating an evolving dynamic in regional relationships. However, internal Lebanese politics complicate this picture, as Hezbollah's leader condemned the talks and framed them as a surrender to Israeli aggression. Additionally, the detention of journalist Ahmed Shihab Eldin in Kuwait highlights the restrictive environments surrounding press freedom amid the conflict, where sensitive discussions regarding the Iran war have led to intensified crackdowns on free expression. Shihab Eldin's case illustrates broader patterns of suppression in Gulf states, utilizing vague national security laws to silence dissent. Parallel to these developments, Iran estimates that the damages from the U.S.-Israeli operations amount to about $270 billion, as reported by a government spokesperson. The Iranian administration is in the early stages of assessing these damages, which include losses in infrastructural integrity and economic degradation, demonstrating the significant impact the conflict has had on Iran's social and economic fabric. Further complicating the geopolitical landscape, Iranian leaders have sought to bolster their image internationally, recently aligning with Pope Leo XIV against criticisms from Trump, emphasizing the pursuit of peace and respect for religious authority. The Iranian parliament has also issued statements condemning insults towards the Pope, reinforcing the notion that moral and religious considerations are increasingly influential in shaping narratives surrounding the conflict. This intricate interplay of diplomatic maneuvering, public sentiment, and geopolitical strategy underscores the complex web that defines current relations within the Middle East and beyond, as nations navigate their positions in the face of shifting power dynamics. The International Monetary Fund (IMF) has issued a stark warning about a potential global oil shortfall this year, exacerbated by ongoing tensions resulting from the war in Iran. IMF chief economist Pierre-Olivier Gourinchas conveyed that even if hostilities were to cease immediately, the world would still face a significant oil supply shortage. This assessment is further supported by the International Energy Agency, IEA, which reported a substantial decline in global oil supply by 10.1 million barrels a day in March, marking the largest disruption in history. However, the IEA revised its forecast, projecting that global oil supply would only exceed demand by 441,000 barrels a day, considerably down from 2.4 million barrels in earlier estimates. The IMF's latest World Economic Outlook report indicates that the global economic landscape has dramatically shifted since the onset of the conflict, with an anticipated growth rate of 3.1% in 2026, down from previous assessments. Gourinchas noted that before the war, the economy was experiencing upward momentum, driven by advancements in artificial intelligence and reduced economic uncertainty. The IMF's outlook highlights the possibility of a looming global recession if the conflict persists, with projections suggesting economic growth could dip below 2% should oil and natural gas prices soar by 100% to 200%. The implications of the war extend beyond oil shortages, affecting public finances and consumer markets. The fund urged governments to refrain from heavy spending to combat rising energy prices, cautioning that public resources were already strained pre-conflict. Despite these challenges, countries like Australia are attempting to mitigate the impact on consumers by temporarily cutting fuel taxes, with Finance Minister Jim Chalmers emphasizing the fallout from the conflict while acknowledging Australia's relative resilience. In the context of ongoing diplomatic efforts, U.S.-Iran negotiations continue to evolve. A Pakistani delegation led by military chief Asim Munir has arrived in Tehran to engage in a second round of talks aimed at addressing the war. Following the expiration of a 2-week ceasefire, reports suggest a tentative agreement to extend the truce, although the U.S. has not formally committed to this extension. Both President Trump and Iranian officials have echoed the urgency of resuming negotiations, despite earlier talks failing to produce a memorandum of understanding. Military actions, notably the U.S. blockade affecting Iranian ports, have compounded the economic strain. The blockade has led to an estimated 90% reduction in Iran's maritime trade, as American warships have intercepted vessels attempting to leave Iranian ports. This strategic maneuver aims to exert pressure on Tehran while also seeking to maintain safety in the Strait of Hormuz, through which a significant portion of the world's oil supply transits. Meanwhile, there are increasing concerns from international observers, including China, about the potential for escalated tensions resulting from the blockade, which they characterize as dangerous and irresponsible. Alongside these developments, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has called for a more realistic approach to resolving the Iranian crisis. He has criticized U.S. actions and called attention to the deeper geopolitical motives surrounding the conflict, framing the situation as a crisis knot that necessitates careful navigation rather than impulsive actions that could worsen hostilities. Lavrov also underscored the importance of respecting Iran's rights regarding nuclear development, amidst allegations from the U.S. and Israel asserting Tehran's pursuit of nuclear weapons. In the broader narrative, remarks made regarding the involvement of U.S. Special Envoy Jared Kushner in Iran discussions have sparked controversy within Japan. Rabbi Abraham Cooper of the Simon Wiesenthal Center condemned comments suggesting Kushner's Jewish heritage could disqualify him from negotiations. He emphasized the dangers of such rhetoric during Holocaust Remembrance Week. Overall, the situation remains volatile, with oil supply dynamics, economic pressures, and complex diplomatic undertones interplay in shaping the future direction of U.S.-Iran relations amid the ongoing conflict. The United States is mobilizing thousands of additional troops to the Middle East, with reports indicating that approximately 10,000 personnel will be deployed before the end of April. This military buildup includes 6,000 troops aboard the USS George H.W. Bush and its accompanying carrier strike group, which is currently navigating around Africa towards the region. An additional 4,200 troops from the Boxer Amphibious Ready Group, including the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit, are expected to arrive shortly thereafter. This deployment brings the total number of troops involved in operations since the onset of the conflict with Iran on February 28th to approximately 50,000. The U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, has asserted that a naval blockade targeting all vessels entering or leaving Iranian ports has been fully implemented. According to CENTCOM, this blockade aims to halt all economic trade with Iran by sea. However, maritime tracking data suggests some Iranian vessels have continued to transit the strategically vital Strait of Hormuz, indicating that the blockade's effectiveness may be limited. In response to the blockade, Iranian authorities issued stark warnings, stating that they would cease all trade across the Gulf should the U.S. continue its military actions. Major General Ali Abdullahi, commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, characterized the U.S. Navy's blockade as an illegal act of aggression that threatens the ongoing ceasefire. Abdullahi's remarks underscored Iran's commitment to protecting its commercial vessels and oil tankers, warning that any continuation of the blockade would constitute a prelude to a violation of the ceasefire agreed upon recently. While U.S. President Donald Trump has expressed confidence that the conflict is nearing an end and hinted at a potential second round of negotiations with Iran hosted in Pakistan, the situation remains precarious. Despite Trump's claims of imminent victory and a swift conclusion to hostilities, reports suggest that the U.S. military is actively planning for a range of ground operations in Iran, which may include deploying special forces to secure Iran's enriched uranium or executing landings near the Strait of Hormuz. In the shadow of these developments, Iran has rejected any significant concessions during negotiations. Iranian officials maintain a resolute stance against U.S. demands, emphasizing that their control over the Strait of Hormuz is a non-negotiable matter of sovereignty. Furthermore, tensions surrounding the nuclear issue persist, with Iranian officials stating their commitment to uranium enrichment for civilian purposes while rejecting overtures perceived as capitulations to U.S. pressure. Negotiations mediated by Pakistan, aimed at de-escalating the situation, faced challenges as a previous round of talks in Islamabad concluded without any agreements. The imminent expiration of the current ceasefire scheduled for next week adds urgency to diplomatic efforts, though conflicting signals from both sides contribute to an atmosphere of uncertainty regarding the truce's future. As military tensions mount, so do the implications for maritime security in one of the world's most critical energy corridors. Analysts warn that further escalation of U.S.-Iranian hostilities, particularly through naval confrontations, could disrupt global shipping and exacerbate the ongoing energy crisis, affecting fuel prices and trade stability on an international scale. Russia's proposal to take Iran's enriched uranium remains a focal point in ongoing nuclear discussions, despite having been rejected by the United States. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov stated that the offer had been on the table for some time and insisted that Iran had initially been receptive to the idea. Peskov characterized the proposal as a very good solution, highlighting that Russian President Vladimir Putin is prepared to return to this initiative, emphasizing cooperation and oversight by the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. Iran, for its part, maintains that uranium enrichment is its sovereign right intended for civilian purposes. Iranian officials have argued that their nuclear program should not be viewed through the lens of nuclear weapon ambitions, a point reiterated in recent statements from Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Bakaye, who declared Iran's enrichment rights as non-negotiable under international law. The backdrop to these discussions includes complicated geopolitical dynamics, particularly following the escalation of military actions involving the United States and Israel against Iran. Iranian officials have accused several Persian Gulf states of complicity in these military operations, alleging that remnants of munitions retrieved from targeted areas indicate the involvement of these governments. Iran's ambassador to the UN, Amir Saeed Iravani, submitted a letter to the Security Council asserting that these countries had aided and abetted the U.S.-Israeli strikes, which they claim constitute a violation of international law. Specific incidents, such as an attack that resulted in the deaths of 168 children in Manab, highlight the human cost of these military maneuvers. Despite the rejection of Russia's proposal and the deteriorating situation, Tehran appears resolute. In response to the ongoing military tensions, Iran has rejected a moratorium on its enrichment program proposed by the U.S., with negotiators advocating for a more limited 5-year freeze instead. Bakaye stressed that dialogue with the U.S. must occur within a broader, comprehensive framework, rejecting Western media narratives surrounding the implications of recent discussions. Simultaneously, the United States has initiated a naval blockade against Iran, aimed at intercepting vessels carrying its oil. However, analysts suggest that this operation is structurally flawed. The blockade is seen as an assertion of control that fails to recognize the complexities of the region's maritime dynamics. Among the critiques, it is argued that Iran has effectively dispersed its shipping routes beyond reach of U.S. enforcement, and that any aggressive actions could provoke broader regional tensions, potentially impacting global energy markets. Regional actors, including China, have been quick to respond to these pressures, affirming their commitments to energy purchases from Iran and warning against disruptions. Observers assert that any American attempt to police the region could lead to confrontation with wider Asian trade interests, marking the Strait of Hormuz as a significant geopolitical flashpoint. These developments have led to shifting priorities within Europe, as the Iranian crisis has started to overshadow the continent's economic challenges. Upcoming European Council meetings will see discussions on economic recovery sidelined, with urgent attention required to manage the fallout from the Middle East crisis, reflecting the interconnectedness of security and economic stability on a global scale. The Pentagon has announced plans to deploy thousands of additional troops to the Middle East as President Donald Trump intensifies efforts to pressure Iran amid ongoing tensions. This troop buildup coincides with the United States' enforcement of a maritime blockade against Iran, aimed at squeezing the regime economically and militarily. Approximately 6,000 troops from the aircraft carrier USS George H.W. Bush, along with its escorting warships, are expected to arrive shortly, while an additional 4,200 personnel from the Boxer Amphibious Ready Group, including the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit, will reach the region later this month. These military movements come as a 2-week ceasefire is set to expire on April 22nd, raising concerns that the U.S. strategy could pivot towards military action if diplomatic talks fail. U.S. military officials suggest that the presence of additional forces increases operational options, with Adam Brad Cooper, head of U.S. Central Command, stating that having a diversity of options available is crucial in negotiations. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt emphasized that it is in Iran's interest to meet U.S. demands, which reportedly include cessation of its nuclear program and an end to the lockdown on commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, a critical choke point for global oil transport. The U.S. blockade has already had notable economic effects, contributing to a rise in energy prices and affecting global markets, evidenced by fluctuations in the S&P 500 and other major indices. In tandem, diplomatic efforts are ongoing, with Pakistani mediators advocating for an extension of the ceasefire to allow for further negotiations. Reports indicate that Vice President J.D. Vance is leading high-stakes discussions with Iranian officials in Islamabad, where there seems to be a preference from Tehran for Vance as a diplomatic counterpart due to his less interventionist stance compared to other U.S. leaders. However, according to Iranian sources, while some progress has been made in narrowing differences over issues such as the management of the Strait of Hormuz and indications of a possible interim deal, significant splits remain, particularly over Iran's nuclear enrichment activities and the status of its uranium stockpiles. A senior Iranian official highlighted that the U.S. desires a long-term suspension of Iran's enrichment efforts, while Iran is pushing for a shorter time frame of 3 to 5 years. Complicating the situation further, Iran has halted all petrochemical exports until further notice due to disruptions in production following attacks on key petrochemical sites. This decision, aligned with the U.S. blockade, aims to stabilize domestic markets and prioritize local supply. As these tensions play out, Iran has also escalated its rhetoric, with military officials threatening to obstruct international trade routes in defense of its sovereignty. The heightened confrontations are underscored by a recent viral digital campaign from the Iranian embassy featuring AI-generated content depicting Jesus criticizing Trump, part of a broader strategy to engage in narrative wars and influence public opinion globally. As the situation evolves, analysts note the internal dynamics within the U.S. political sphere are increasingly affecting its approach towards Iran, as differing elite perspectives increasingly shape foreign policy options. The engagement with Vice President Vance appears to reflect a recognition of these divisions, presenting a potential opening for diplomatic resolutions amidst the backdrop of military posturing and economic sanctions. The ongoing war with Iran has significantly deviated from initial U.S. strategic expectations, resulting in what has been described as a redefinition of the conflict, characterized by a series of critical miscalculations by Washington. A detailed analysis indicates that the United States underestimated the complexity and endurance of Iranian military responses, particularly following the initial 12-day engagement with Israel, which was perceived to set the stage for a quick U.S. victory. Instead, this led to a prolonged 40-day war of attrition with significant military, economic, and political repercussions for the United States. Among the most notable mistakes was the incorrect assumption that Iran would not exhibit the same levels of military resolve as observed during its brief engagement with Israel. U.S. officials, including General Keane, cautioned against closing the Strait of Hormuz due to potential repercussions. Yet President Trump pursued a strategy based on the belief that Iran would capitulate before escalating to such a blockade. The reality proved otherwise, as Iran utilized the strait strategically, thereby disrupting both military and economic forecasts for the U.S. Further complicating the U.S. position was a significant shift in Iran's strategic focus. Initially, assessments predicted that Iran's primary target would be Israel. However, during the conflict, Iran shifted its aggression towards U.S. military bases across the region, directly threatening allied nations like the UAE, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia. This pivot reflected a broader, more unified axis of resistance that coordinated operations against U.S. interests, contradicting prior expectations of marginal involvement from Iranian-aligned groups. Intelligence failures also played a critical role, particularly in misjudging Iran's domestic stability. The U.S. government anticipated that ongoing internal unrest would destabilize the Iranian government. Instead, the war galvanized national unity and a heightened sense of resistance among the population. This misreading of Iranian resilience was compounded by increasing pressure from within the U.S., where media criticism and public protest concerning civilian casualties, especially following events like the Manab school tragedy, challenged the moral legitimacy of the conflict. The U.S. military's decision-making processes during this conflict also appeared fractured. Reports indicate that internal disagreements led to the dismissal of senior military commanders, raising concerns over operational integrity and continuity. Such turmoil within the Pentagon suggests deeper institutional challenges that the military may need to address in future engagements. As the conflict continues, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth reiterated the readiness of U.S. forces to resume combat if a ceasefire agreement is not achieved. He stated that the military remains postured to resume major combat operations at literally a moment's notice. Moreover, Hegseth emphasized that U.S. military operations, including blockades of Iranian vessels, would continue to impose pressure until a favorable deal is reached, projecting an image of unwavering strength amid ongoing negotiations. Meanwhile, the war's implications extend beyond military engagement, significantly impacting economic conditions. Reports indicate that the escalation of oil prices, surging past 120, has begun to manifest in broader economic challenges, notably affecting labor markets in the U.S. Weekly jobless claims, although dropping to 207,000, reflect uncertainty as firms exhibit caution in hiring due to fluctuating energy costs and inflation pressures stemming from the conflict. This economic ripple effect is mirrored in Europe, particularly within Germany, which has halved its growth forecast for 2026 from 1.0% to 0.5%, attributing this significant change to rising oil prices due to the conflict. This trend could potentially derail recovery efforts and increase inflation beyond existing projections, consequently affecting household consumption and trade balances. Overall, the ongoing war with Iran serves as a critical example of the complexities inherent in modern military engagements, where initial assessments can rapidly diverge from battlefield realities, compounding challenges for all involved nations. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth recently addressed the ongoing tension between the United States and Iran, stating that U.S. forces are locked and loaded to strike Iran's power plants and energy industry if directed to do so. This statement comes as the U.S. Naval Blockade of Iran, which has been in effect since early April, raises the stakes ahead of the upcoming expiration of the current ceasefire. Hegseth emphasized that Iran must make prudent decisions as it approaches potential negotiations with the United States, warning that the U.S. military stands ready for combat operations almost immediately. During a Pentagon news briefing, Hegseth described the blockade as polite behavior amid escalating tensions, asserting that it was intended to compel Iran to negotiate terms that could lead to peace. He remarked, "We are reloading with more power than ever before and better intelligence. U.S. military assets, estimated at about 10,000 personnel, have been deployed to enforce this blockade, which has already led to redirecting 14 ships. This blockade is significant not only for its military implications but also for the economic ramifications." Hegseth mentioned that the U.S. appears poised to maintain heightened economic pressure on Iran, a strategy that includes controlling shipments linked to Iranian ports. Meanwhile, Admiral Brad Cooper from U.S. Central Command indicated that military adjustments to enforce the blockade are ongoing, although he did not elaborate on specific tactical changes. Compounding the crisis is a severe shortage of jet fuel in Europe, attributed to the disruption in the Strait of Hormuz, a crucial passage for global oil and liquefied natural gas supplies. Fatih Birol, head of the International Energy Agency, warned that Europe might only have 6 weeks of jet fuel remaining, which could lead to flight cancellations amid the busy summer travel season. The crisis has pushed Brent crude prices above $100 per barrel, significantly impacting energy pricing globally and leading some European nations to consult with over 40 countries, excluding the U.S., on strategies to mitigate the fallout. Negotiations appear complicated as U.S. and Iranian officials suggest a peace deal could take around 6 months to finalize. There have been proposals to extend the ceasefire to allow for more discussions, with key issues focusing on the management of the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian officials indicated a willingness to allow free navigation through the strait, conditional upon the unfreezing of some of its assets. However, contradictions in the negotiation positions highlighted deeper complexities, as Iran demands a shorter duration for nuclear enrichment restrictions than the U.S. is prepared to accept. Additionally, some analysts contend that Iran's strategy might be to prolong talks without committing to concrete actions, maintaining a state of managed irresolution. This maneuvering could allow Iran to outlast U.S. political cycles while extracting concessions. The approach has often led to frustration in Washington, where there is skepticism about Iran's intentions and its negotiators. As diplomatic efforts unfold, military readiness remains a defining element of U.S. strategy, with Hegseth cautioning that failure to accept a peace deal could lead to devastating consequences for Iran. He stated that if Iran chooses poorly, it would face a continuation of the blockade, paired with military action targeting essential infrastructure. General Dan Kane, chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, concurred, asserting that the military's posture is primed to resume major operations at a moment's notice if necessary. President Donald Trump has recently escalated his rhetoric concerning Iran's nuclear ambitions and his interactions with Pope Leo XIV. During an interview with CNN anchor Caitlin Collins, Trump claimed, "The Pope made a statement. He says Iran can have a nuclear weapon. I say Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon." However, this assertion was promptly rebutted, as there has been no documented statement from Pope Leo indicating any support for Iran possessing nuclear capabilities. Instead, Pope Leo has consistently denounced nuclear weapons and called for global disarmament, emphasizing dialogue and diplomacy as essential to achieving lasting peace. Pope Leo, who assumed his papacy in May 2025, has made a series of statements against nuclear armament, categorically stating, "The commitment to creating a safer world, free from the nuclear threat, should be pursued through respectful encounter and sincere dialogue." In July 2025, he noted, "Nuclear arms offend our shared humanity and also betray the dignity of creation, whose harmony we are called to safeguard." His Vatican representative to the United Nations has also reinforced the Holy See's commitment to disarmament, reflecting a long-standing opposition to the proliferation of nuclear weapons. In recent developments, Trump has made claims regarding Iran agreeing to relinquish nuclear dust, a colloquial term for highly enriched uranium purportedly buried under their nuclear facilities following U.S. military strikes. This assertion lacks confirmation from Iranian officials and hinges on the context of ongoing negotiations amid an impending ceasefire. Trump declared, "Iran does not have a nuclear weapon, and they've agreed to that," while emphasizing the significance of securing the uranium. His administration continues to grapple with diplomatic strategies amidst military postures, as Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth warned Iran of U.S. readiness to respond with increased military force should negotiations falter. Concurrently, the U.S. war effort against Iran, which began with airstrikes in February, is impacting military supply chains. Reports indicate delays in U.S. weapons deliveries to several European nations due to the strain on U.S. inventories caused by the ongoing conflict. This situation is particularly concerning for European countries, which have expressed frustration over these supply interruptions. U.S. officials have pointed to a need for weapons in the Middle East, placing blame on European nations for their perceived lack of assistance in combating Iranian aggression. As the landscape of the region evolves, Saudi Arabia is also shifting its economic priorities in response to the conflict. Initially poised for significant foreign investments and growth, the ongoing war with Iran has prompted the kingdom to curtail its expenditure in foreign markets and reassess domestic priorities. The International Monetary Fund slashed the 2026 growth forecast for Saudi Arabia from 4.5% to 3.1%, asserting that the conflict has hampered the country's oil output and shaken investor confidence. Moreover, Indian refiners have restarted oil purchases from Iran for the first time since 2019, reportedly settling payments in yuan via ICICI Bank due to a temporary waiver from U.S. sanctions. This arrangement underscores the complexities of international trade under geopolitical pressures. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent recently indicated that the waivers for buying Iranian oil would not be renewed, suggesting a tightening of enforcement on sanctions against Iran. In summary, the interplay between international diplomacy, military readiness, and economic strategies continues to shape the geopolitical landscape surrounding Iran. From Trump's contentious statements regarding Pope Leo's alleged comments to significant shifts in Saudi and Indian energy policies, the ramifications of these developments are unfolding on multiple fronts. Systematic hedge funds recorded a significant surge in stock purchases, with data from Goldman Sachs indicating an injection of $86 billion into equities during the last 5 trading sessions. This uptick reflects one of the largest trading demands in history from commodity trading advisors, CTAs, which utilize algorithms to capitalize on market trends. Investors are reportedly optimistic amid hopes for a resolution to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, which has pushed global stocks near record highs and set them on a trajectory for a third consecutive week of gains. Goldman Sachs' analysis forecasts that hedge funds may add an additional $70 billion to the stock market in the upcoming sessions. Such historical buying activity, characterized by swift market movements, has not been seen since August 2024, November 2023, and September 2019. In parallel, the geopolitical landscape is heavily influenced by recent developments in Iran, particularly concerning its peace negotiations with the United States. After inconclusive talks, Iranian negotiators were escorted home by Pakistan's Air Force due to perceived threats from Israel. Sources indicate that approximately 20 Pakistan Air Force jets, including top-tier Chinese-made J-10s, were deployed to ensure the safety of the Iranian delegation, led by Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. The escort followed concerns that Israeli forces might attempt to target them. This level of protection, exceeding standard protocol, underscores the heightened tensions in the region and the precarious nature of these diplomatic engagements. While these peace discussions unfold, the international response to the ongoing Iran war reveals complexities surrounding neutrality. The conflict has shifted traditional geopolitical dynamics, with nations increasingly compelled to choose sides amid military confrontations. For instance, the war has led to Iranian strikes on Gulf state infrastructures, triggering force majeure declarations and suspensions in operations from countries like Qatar, which has experienced immediate repercussions in its energy sector. This has had wider implications for global markets, with European gas prices surging following disruptions in oil supply chains. Amidst this turmoil, India has resumed purchasing Iranian oil, utilizing a temporary U.S. sanctions waiver that was granted in March. These transactions are notable as they involve payments made in yuan via the Shanghai branch of ICICI Bank, emphasizing a significant shift in how international trade, particularly in oil, is being conducted amidst sanctions. Historically, Iranian crude comprised a substantial portion of India's oil imports before restrictions were imposed in 2019. With Indian refiners navigating the complexities of sanction compliance, the use of yuan for transactions indicates a broader trend of diversifying currency use in global oil trade. Adding to the regional dynamics, Iranian officials have declared that the Strait of Hormuz is fully open for all commercial vessels, coinciding with a ceasefire agreement in Lebanon between Israel and Hezbollah. This announcement is critical, as the strait serves as a major transit route for global oil shipments, handling roughly 20% of the world's crude exports. Following this declaration, oil prices experienced a sharp decline, dropping over 10% in value, reflecting immediate market responses to changes in shipping conditions and perceived geopolitical stability in the region. As these components interweave, the situation in the Middle East remains deeply intricate, characterized by escalating military actions, diplomatic negotiations, and shifting market responses that together define the landscape of international relations and trade. Iran has announced that the Strait of Hormuz will remain completely open to commercial vessels during a 10-day ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah, as stated by Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. This declaration comes amid ongoing tensions involving the United States, which continues a blockade of Iranian ports until negotiations are fully settled. The U.S. position was reinforced by President Donald Trump, who acknowledged the strait's opening but emphasized that the naval blockade on Iran would remain in full force until a comprehensive agreement is reached. Trump announced that the ceasefire was achieved after intense diplomatic discussions, highlighting that the opening of the Strait of Hormuz is a significant step towards easing the ongoing conflict. However, he specified that Iran has committed to never closing the strait again. Following the announcement, oil prices saw a sharp decline, with Brent crude dropping by 9.7% to $90.38 per barrel, marking a significant market response to the news. While Iranian state media supported the ceasefire announcement, there are internal contradictions within Iran's political landscape regarding the status of the strait. Some reports suggested concerns from state-influenced media, indicating that the Strait of Hormuz might need continued restrictions as it remains a critical leverage point in the ongoing conflict. For instance, military officials stated that vessels would still require permission from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps to transit the strait, raising questions about the practical implications of the foreign minister's statement. Despite the optimism reflected in markets, where stock indices rose sharply following the ceasefire news, analysts cautioned against assuming a quick return to normalcy in maritime routes. Many shipping companies prioritize the safety of their crews and cargo and have expressed that they will await clear indicators that the ceasefire is stable before resuming operations in the strait. Historical instances of maritime disruptions in the region will likely inform their cautious approach. In a broader context, the ceasefire and associated movements are occurring as part of a larger geopolitical landscape involving domestic pressures faced by Trump, especially as midterm elections approach. Economic analysts have noted rising inflation rates, exacerbated by fluctuating oil prices, and this could contribute to Trump's declining approval ratings. In contrast, Iran appears to be adopting a strategy of endurance, hoping to withstand current military pressures long enough for a shift in political dynamics in the U.S. to emerge. International reactions have further solidified the significance of the ongoing dialogue. Leaders from France and the United Kingdom have responded positively to the ceasefire, suggesting increased diplomatic efforts to ensure maritime safety and the protection of trade routes in the Gulf. French President Emmanuel Macron emphasized the need for commitment to free passage through the strait, explicitly opposing any potential system of tolls or privatization attempts that could limit access. As the situation unfolds, the implications of the ceasefire and the status of the Strait of Hormuz will likely shape not only regional dynamics, but also have considerable repercussions for global energy markets. Given that approximately 20% of the world's oil supply transits through this vital choke point, Iran has declared the Strait of Hormuz completely open to all commercial vessels for the duration of a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Lebanon. Iranian Foreign Minister Sayed Abbas Araghchi made the announcement, indicating that this decision supports the passage of vessels and is aligned with the newly established truce. He stated, "The passage for all commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz is declared completely open for the remaining period of ceasefire." This development comes nearly 10 days after a ceasefire deal was reached concerning ongoing hostilities that have already claimed over 2,000 lives in Lebanon. The U.S. response, articulated by President Donald Trump, expressed gratitude for Iran's statement but simultaneously confirmed that the naval blockade on Iranian ports would remain in full force until a definitive agreement is reached. Trump emphasized in a post on Truth Social, "The Strait of Hormuz is completely open and ready for business and full passage, but the naval blockade will remain in full force." This contradiction raises questions about the implications for shipping and oil prices, as operational realities differ markedly from political declarations. Oil prices reacted sharply to Iran's announcement, plummeting from over $98 a barrel to below $90. This decline follows a period of significant volatility in oil markets due to military tensions in the region that had driven prices as high as $120 per barrel in March. Economic analysts have noted that the potential for increased oil flow through the strait could alleviate some pressure on global markets. Major stock indices in the United States also showed gains following the announcement. However, global maritime organizations remain cautious. Shipping companies, including Stena Bulk, have indicated that they are monitoring the situation closely, emphasizing that safety remains paramount. Jacob Larson, Chief Safety and Security Officer at Shipping Association BIMCO, advised operators to consider avoiding the area altogether, citing unresolved threats, particularly from mines in the waterway. The International Maritime Organization, IMO, is also seeking to verify Iran's commitment to ensuring safe passage for merchant vessels. Furthermore, a senior Iranian official noted that although the strait is open, movements of ships will still require coordination with Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. This reinforces the notion that while the maritime passage may be more accessible for commercial traffic, operational control and security remain firmly in Iranian hands. The official stated, navigation would take place in coordination with Iran, implying a system of checks that foreign ships will have to navigate amidst the evolving military landscape. Despite these new declarations, other shipping operators remain skeptical about resuming normal traffic through the strait. They have pointed out that recent geopolitical tensions will likely telegraph a period of uncertainty. Notably, if the U.S.-imposed blockade continues, Iranian officials have signaled that they may consider reclosing the strait, exacerbating fears around global energy supplies, as the strait is a critical choke point for oil and liquefied natural gas trade. Compounding the complexity of the situation, the Trump administration is reportedly contemplating a renewed diplomatic effort aimed at negotiating a comprehensive agreement with Iran that could include unfreezing Iranian assets, an estimated $30 billion currently blocked by sanctions, as part of any deal to ensure safe passage through the strategic waterway. Iranian media has underscored the necessary conditions for peace, emphasizing that ensuring freedom of navigation is contingent upon the lifting of economic sanctions and cessation of hostilities from the U.S. and allies. The dynamic interplay of military readiness, strategic navigation, and market responsiveness characterizes the current status of the Strait of Hormuz and signifies an ongoing geopolitical chess game that observers will follow closely in the coming days. As economic ramifications unfold, the frequent fluctuations in oil prices reflect the underlying instability of the region, with experts predicting that full recovery of oil output may take months once the strait remains reliably open for commercial use. The potential for lasting impacts on global supply chains, particularly in critical sectors like agriculture due to fertilizer supply disruptions, looms large as negotiations and military posturing continue. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced that the United States will collaborate with Iran to recover its enriched uranium, expressing optimism regarding future negotiations. In a statement made during a phone interview with Reuters, Trump emphasized a gradual approach. We're going to get it together. We're going to go in with Iran at a nice leisurely pace and go down and start excavating with big machinery. We'll bring it back to the United States. He mentioned the term nuclear dust while suggesting that the retrieval process would commence very soon. However, the Iranian government has categorically denied any agreement to transfer enriched uranium to the United States, with Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghai asserting, Iran's enriched uranium is not going to be transferred anywhere. Transferring uranium to the United States has not been an option for us. The discussions around Iran's nuclear program have been central to the U.S.-Iran negotiations, especially as Iran reportedly possesses over 900 pounds of uranium enriched up to 60% purity. Trump further noted that the U.S. would maintain its naval blockade against Iran until a conclusive agreement is reached, asserting, I think the deal will go very quickly. We're getting along very well with Iran. Trump mentioned potential additional talks could occur over the weekend, and he hinted at the possibility of visiting Islamabad following any agreement. Furthermore, he addressed a speculative report regarding a $20 billion cash for uranium deal, firmly stating, "It's totally false. No money is changing hands." The geopolitical landscape surrounding this dialogue has seen recent developments, notably with the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, which is critical for global oil transit. French President Emmanuel Macron welcomed this reopening following a ceasefire agreement and indicated that European leaders are considering a maritime force to secure navigation in the area. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi confirmed that commercial vessels could now transit through the strait as a result of the ceasefire. However, while this announcement indicates a temporary opening, it also highlights the complex security situation, as the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps has asserted that only non-military vessels would receive permission to enter. The ongoing conflict has imposed significant economic consequences, with losses exceeding $50 billion in global oil production over the last 50 days, attributed to the Iran war. Gulf Arab producers experienced substantial reductions in their crude output, while jet fuel exports from the region have plummeted significantly. Analysts caution that full restoration of oil production and related infrastructure could take several years, given the extent of the disruption related to the conflict. In tandem with these developments, Trump made several claims on social media that suggested major concessions by Iran. He asserted that Iran would agree to never close the Strait of Hormuz again, a claim that lacks confirmation from Iranian officials. While the initial reopening appears connected to the current pause in fighting in Lebanon, analysts have raised doubts about the reliability of Trump's assertions. Yazid Saei, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Middle East Center, remarked that Trump's exaggeration of progress might be aimed at stabilizing oil markets amidst rising fuel prices driven by the strain on oil supply due to the conflict. Additionally, on the subject of Israel, Trump claimed that Israeli military operations against Lebanon were prohibited as part of the negotiations for a lasting ceasefire. This represents a notable shift in U.S. policy, as traditional responses towards Israeli actions in the region have typically demonstrated significant support. The dynamics surrounding these negotiations remain fluid, particularly as U.S. officials maintain a blockade on Iranian ports during the ongoing diplomatic talks, further complicating the situation. With reports indicating that Iran may retaliate by closing the strait should the naval blockade continue, the clarity around Trump's proclamations and Iran's responses will be critical in understanding future engagements. Meanwhile, regional powers and the international community remain watchful of these developments, particularly as they hold implications for global energy markets and broader geopolitical stability. U.S. President Donald Trump has asserted that the Strait of Hormuz is fully open and ready for full passage, following Iran's announcement to allow commercial vessels during a temporary ceasefire. This declaration was made in a post on Truth Social, where Trump expressed gratitude to Iran for the announcement. However, he later underscored that the United States' blockade of shipping from Iranian ports remains fully intact. Trump stated, "The Strait of Hormuz is completely open and ready for business and full passage, but the naval blockade will remain in full force and effect as it pertains to Iran, until such time as our transaction with Iran is 100% complete." Iran's Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi, indicated that the decision to permit passage through the strait is linked to a ceasefire in Lebanon, valid for the duration of the truce. The maritime passage will follow a coordinated route. Araghchi clarified that only vessels with explicit clearance from Iranian authorities, not associated with the U.S. or Israel, would be permitted to transit to navigate around risks, including potential sea mines. He emphasized that the maritime blockade by the U.S. would violate the terms of the ceasefire, which could prompt Iran to close the strait again. If the maritime blockade continues, it will be considered a violation of the ceasefire, and the transit route through the Strait of Hormuz will be closed, an unnamed Iranian official told Fars news agency. Despite the apparent easing of restrictions for commercial shipping, the U.S. military has stated that maritime trade to and from Iran remains halted due to the blockade established during the ongoing U.S.-Iran ceasefire negotiations. This blockade has intensified tensions in the region, especially following U.S. and Israeli military actions against Iranian interests, which began approximately 6 weeks ago. The Strait of Hormuz, which is critical for global oil transportation, handles about 20% of the world's oil and liquefied gas daily, raising concerns over a potential global energy crisis should the waterway be closed. In a separate discourse, Trump dismissed claims of a $20 billion deal involving Iranian uranium, asserting that no financial transactions were taking place in securing what he referred to as nuclear dust. He claimed that significant breakthroughs had been achieved in suspending Iran's nuclear program and restoring free passage through the strait. "We're going to get it together. We'll bring it back to the United States," Trump said, indicating a future effort to retrieve enriched uranium purportedly targeted by U.S. and Israeli strikes. Contradicting assertions regarding the status of the strait, Trump's administration acknowledges the intricate relationship between the ceasefire in Lebanon and maritime access through Hormuz. The U.S. president claimed that the U.S. would work with Iran to clear mines from the strait as part of the stability restoration efforts, while also indicating that negotiations aimed at a lasting agreement would likely occur over the weekend. Doubts remain prevalent in the international community regarding the authenticity and efficacy of the purported agreements, particularly in light of Iran's demands for the removal of sanctions and reparations for damages in prior conflicts. Trump's statements did not address these fundamental negotiations or Iran's insistence on maintaining a civilian nuclear program as a signatory of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Overall, the ongoing maritime dynamics at the Strait of Hormuz reflect a complex interplay of geopolitical maneuvering as regional stability hangs in the balance amid fragile ceasefire agreements and contentious U.S.-Iran relations. Anchor sign-off for Daylight News TV. Iran 17/04/2026. And that concludes our coverage on the ongoing developments in Iran as of April 17, 2026. The events unfolding in this region serve as a potent reminder of the complexities of geopolitical dynamics and the profound impact they can have on both national and international scales. While the situation continues to evolve, it underscores the fragile nature of peace and stability in a world that remains interconnected, yet often divided by differing ideologies, aspirations, and histories. As we reflect on these events, it is essential to consider their implications not only for those directly involved, but for us all, as members of a global community searching for understanding and cooperation in an era marked by uncertainty. The essence of humanity lies in our ability to bridge divides, foster dialogue, and work towards a more harmonious future. Thank you for joining us on Daylight News TV. Stay informed, stay curious, and until next time, good night.